I've heard many stories that show how just this angst and depression seems to be growing in this world, this polarity, and how easy it is and become for people to fire arrows. It is a dividing line that is happening right now between 3D, 5D, this growing force of light and dark. I tend to fall into this deep metaphoric space as a hypnotherapist and imagineer that builds visualizations out of inspiration of my heart for clients. This story really came to mind. And as noted, it's an African story that may seem to make things worse than they are. Yet eventually you will see that it reveals this essentialness about nature of the human heart. It begins in this beautiful, small, simple village where this young woman becomes a mother by giving birth to her first beautiful child. It was a time when people lived simply. And soon after giving birth, the young mother strapped that little one on her back and she went off to work in the little plot of land that was this garden for her family. And after working the earth for a while, the mother took that infant and placed it at the base of a tree so that she could continue working in the garden. And as the sun rose in the sky and the heat of the day intensified, that infant began to cry. Now, being an attentive mother, the mother stopped working and followed the instinct to suckle and nourish that child with her breasts. Afterwards, she laid that infant back down in the shade of the tree and went back to her work. And after a while, the child began to cry again. The mother stopped to look at the infant and was startled to see that a large bird had come to the tree and had settled upon her child. This great bird seemed to soothe the child with its wings, and soon enough the infant became quiet and fell softly to sleep. However, seeing this great bird so near to her child caused this young woman to become greatly alarmed. What if that bird was to eat my child? She thought. And suddenly she ran towards the baby because the bird had lifted its great wings and rised up into the air. And the mother took the child, suckled it, and held it close to her heart. And only after a while did she finish her work and return to the village, carrying that infant in her arms. And that night in the little hut she shared with her husband, she did not mention a word of the episode with the great bird and her child. She said nothing of the marvel that had happened, but kept her thoughts and her feelings to herself. Now, the next morning, she went to work in the garden again and once again placed the infant at the foot of the tree. She worked the land in the heat of the day, and the same thing happened. This is to say, when her child began to cry, that great bird descended to soothe it. And this time, she could see more clearly that it was an eagle. And it had an instant soothing effect on this little child who quickly fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. At that point, that young woman had to accept that eagle had no intention of harming her child, just the opposite. She began to understand that the great bird settled the child and brought great peace and solace. And at the same time, that young mother still felt the need to protect and nourish that infant. So once again, she went to hold her child. And in this time, the bird rose gently, lifting itself to a limb just above the mother and child. That evening, when she returned to the village and sat in the hut with her husband, she told him this astounding thing that had happened to her child. She described to him how these 2 days in a row, this great eagle came about in the garden where she worked. She told the details, how the bird arrived, how the infant began to cry, and how this bird settled it. How each time this baby stopped crying and fell into a sleep. Not surprisingly, the husband and the father of this great child refused to believe the story that his wife told. He insisted that This was no such thing. It couldn't happen. She's making it up. And no matter what the wife said, the husband concluded that it was simply not true. So that night was spent the way you spend a night in a hut in which a woman believes one thing and a man sees it another way. With the dawning of a new day, the mother and the child went back to the garden, and once again, the baby started to cry. The eagle appeared, descended upon the child, and at this time, the mother of the child thought she would call her foolish husband and show him just what was true and what was not. So she ran back to the village. She drew near the village, began calling out her husband to quickly see this astounding thing. And at the moment it happened, that young father was sitting with other hunters sharpening their arrows. And when he left to follow the wife, he carried his bow and a couple of arrows. Soon after mother and father arrived at the garden, they saw this huge eagle resting on this little child. He was both astounded but horrified. Quickly, he placed these two arrows in the bow, took aim at the eagle, and without thought, let the arrows fly. Seeing these arrows coming through the air, the eagle simply raised its great wings and lifted itself into the sky. As the bird rose into the air, the arrows pierced the infant, and the infant fell from sleep into death. Now the eagle settled onto the branch of the tree and suddenly began to speak, saying to both shocked parents, "Now killing has begun, and from now on, people will kill each other. Now kindness amongst people will be reduced, and understanding of children will be diminished." Needless to say, this is a shocking story, especially if taken literally. But the ancient storytellers often use this dramatic effect and the trauma to provoke a greater sense of imagination. People living close to nature on a daily basis would intuitively understand the connection between a child and an eagle could not be literal and therefore must be symbolic and metaphorical. But there's something more like this awakening in the heart. So when we look at the mythical and the metaphorical sense of imagination, which reveals that every event, inner and outer, can be open to a greater sense of understanding. And when you look back at even the Greek, meta means beside or beyond, and phora means to carry or that which carries. So metaphors are intended to carry us beyond the obvious and past the literal level in order to see with the eyes of the heart. Metaphors reveal facts of a different order and truths of a different nature. The image of a full-grown eagle coming to bring peace to a tiny infant is a startling metaphor, and yet we can somehow imagine. It is in that way our imagination allows us to see the mysterious and the hidden connections that make sense of all things otherwise seem unrelated. So you can see the different perspectives, the mystery of which includes this sense that something that can be fierce and dangerous can also have a soothing effect. The dichotomy of a soothing spirit can also be a devouring depiction of a key aspect of human nature, which is the inherent genius of each child. The word supernatural combines all that seems more natural with that which seems above and beyond nature. So it is the nature of genius to inhabit both of these worlds, the natural, the supernatural, when seen with the eyes of the heart. Now, many ancient traditions hold similar stories of this child. And the old story of the eagle and the child points to what we become and became of a common tragedy of parents becoming indifferent, confused, rejecting the spiritual nature that enters into the world through their child. Not only that, but that unique spirit of a child does not find a welcome in his world, then that child will then grow and struggle to be mighty, to find the world's beauty and natural connections in this instinctive way that can best soothe their soul. So imagine the number of arrows that have been launched at children by adults, saying things like children should be seen and not heard, beliefs like that you can only come from what has already been repressed in the natural spirit versus the spontaneity of their own soul. For those who see things literally and those who have not fully experienced the wings of their own imagination. The accompanies of life, which seem unbelievable and unreal at times. And it can be threatening as well, just like the father whose child had this deep connection to the great spirit of the bird. The inability of the parents to see the giftedness of their own child. Now, these ancient stories often have irrational components, but in this tale of the eagle and the child, one of the irrational elements appears when the father shoots the arrows. Again, if it looked literal, but if we looked at it symbolically, there's two views, and it suggests that each parent has contributed an arrow to the wounding of their child. It's very clear that the father acts out of shock rather out of instinct to protect the child, but they blend together. So you can catch these family dynamics. Many of these stories and teachings are really a teaching to our spiritual imagination in lives as adults. There's a recognition that there's something happening with children and the connection beyond him or herself, beyond family, beyond the natural. It's the supernatural. So, what is the way for you to remove the wounds of these doubts in your heart and understand that is the ingenious of our parents of protection, but also there's still the magic that is still there for you? On the other side of the adventure of our souls, it's an undertaking. There's a possibility of finding connection to a sense of spirit that once was much greater than how we think of ourselves today. In the way that the eagle is so much greater than the infant, but also implies and involves the connection that can settle us, center us, ground us more than anything else. This is the big surprise in this story, that what ultimately soothes our souls is a connection to spirit that goes beyond the parents, beyond the family, beyond the daily world, that connects to nature, as when that great bird sits in the branch of the tree and speaks about how killing the end of this world must stop, and we must go beyond our nature to the supernatural. Whether we call it great spirit or great self, something greater than ourselves and yet secretly connected to ourselves keeps trying to enter the world through ourselves. This greater spirit for life has no choice but to enter the hearts and the souls of the living. So, on one level, we can say we're so tiny, but when compared to the size of the cosmos and when measured against the troubles of that world, on the other hand, there is something that we are connected to that is greater. It is like the wings of the great bird that has a precision of seeing like a great eagle, that has a way of lifting up as well as settling down. So, in the end, calling back on the lines of Rumi, where he says that a human being is essentially a spirit eye. And whatever you really see, you are that. So, in that sense, we are here to open the eyes of the heart. And in doing so, we become that which we were from the beginning. And although it can be painful to keep opening our heart, it turns out that opening that way allows the wings of the heart to lift, and also turns out to be the way that we can truly allow ourselves to center and to settle and find genuine solace in our hearts. So, what is an example of how that has been in your life? For me, my spirit guides have brought me this vision of getting a puppy. And I'm like, I don't want the responsibility, don't want to pay for it. Got a lot on my list. But in the essence of bigger than myself, that dog is connected to also something bigger that brings in joy, fun, spontaneity, those things that my heart needs to mold and to soften around. What is that for you? Continue to find the support, but remember this great story. All my love, my friends. Thank you for listening. I hope to bring many more metaphors, readings through tarot and divination, oracle. And if there's anything I can do for you, please don't feel um, at all that you don't belong in the Growth Guild community. These are the things where we will explore. You can further support this podcast by simply becoming a member of the Growth Guild community. It is free. In 2024, we will have events. There are existing courses and audios and podcasts you can find as well to support you. All right, all my love, all my light, and I hope you enjoyed the story of the great eagle and the child.